The most dangerous promise is the one you make when you believe your heart will never change. Ava Carter stood motionless before the floor-to-ceiling windows as the first light of morning stretched across the Chicago skyline, wondering how 99 days could feel both impossibly long and frighteningly short at the same time. Behind her, the quiet office carried the scent of polished walnut and fresh coffee, but nothing inside the room softened the presence of Damian Castellano. Every movement he made reflected discipline that had been practiced for years, from the precise way he adjusted the cuff of his tailored jacket to the calm rhythm of his breathing. He did not appear nervous, excited, or uncertain. To him, this meeting resembled another business negotiation, one more agreement carefully designed to solve a problem with the least possible emotional cost. Ava wished she possessed the same certainty. The hospital had called again before sunrise. Her mother's treatment could not wait much longer. Every option she had explored had disappeared one by one until this extraordinary proposal became the only door still left open. Damian finally placed a thick leather folder on the desk between them. Inside rested a contract that would legally bind two complete strangers together for exactly 99 days. Every page had been prepared by attorneys. Every sentence had been reviewed with relentless precision. Public appearances would be scheduled in advance. Personal finances would remain separate. Private bedrooms would be maintained. Neither party would interfere in the personal decisions of the other unless the agreement specifically required it. Ava slowly turned each page, her heartbeat growing louder than the silence surrounding them. Then she reached the final clause. At midnight on the 99th day, the marriage would legally end without discussion, regardless of any personal feelings that might exist by then. Damian looked directly into her eyes for the first time since she entered the room. "I believe clear boundaries prevent unnecessary complications," he said in an even voice. "The contract protects both of us." Ava understood exactly what he meant. He had spent his life building walls that neither trust nor affection could cross. She wondered what had happened to convince a man that certainty was safer than love, but she knew better than to ask. This arrangement was never meant to invite personal questions. She quietly picked up the fountain pen resting beside the folder. Her fingers trembled for only a brief second before becoming perfectly steady. She signed her name with deliberate strokes, realizing that every letter carried the weight of her mother's future. Damian immediately signed beneath her signature without hesitation. Two signatures completed a marriage that neither celebration nor romance had created. The silence afterward felt strangely heavier than the conversation itself. Damian closed the folder and stood. "A driver will take you to the estate within the hour," he said. "Everything you need has already been prepared." Ava nodded politely, but before leaving she glanced once more at the contract lying between them. It had promised security, stability, and enough money to save the person she loved most. It had promised structure, order, and an ending already marked on the calendar. What it did not mention was the unpredictable nature of two lonely lives suddenly forced beneath the same roof. As she walked toward the door, neither of them noticed that the carefully written agreement had overlooked the one condition no lawyer could ever control, because while contracts can define time, they can never command the human heart. The black sedan carried Ava through the quiet streets of Chicago until the skyline slowly disappeared behind rows of towering oak trees and carefully sculpted stone walls. Every mile seemed to separate her from the ordinary life she had always known and pull her deeper into a world that operated by entirely different rules. When the wrought iron gates opened without a sound, the Castellano estate emerged from the winter landscape like a place untouched by time. The mansion stood proudly beneath a pale morning sky, surrounded by acres of perfectly maintained gardens now resting beneath a blanket of fresh snow. Every window reflected the soft sunlight, every path had already been cleared, and every detail spoke of order, discipline, and absolute control. Ava stepped from the car carrying only one modest suitcase, suddenly aware that everything she owned could fit inside it while the man she had just married possessed more than she could imagine. Before she reached the entrance, the massive front doors opened. An elderly butler dressed in an immaculate black suit greeted her with a respectful nod. "Welcome home, Mrs. Castellano." The words sounded unfamiliar, almost as though they belonged to another woman. Several members of the household staff stood quietly inside the grand entrance hall. They welcomed her politely, but curiosity lingered in their expressions. Some believed she had married for wealth. Others quietly wondered how long someone like her could survive in a house where emotions rarely found a place. Ava smiled warmly at each of them, introducing herself before anyone else could speak. The simple gesture caught several employees by surprise because very few people had ever asked for their names first. The butler escorted her through long marble hallways lined with paintings, elegant chandeliers, and towering windows that overlooked frozen gardens stretching for what seemed like miles. The house felt magnificent, but it also felt strangely lonely, as though every room had been carefully designed for admiration instead of comfort. Damien appeared near the grand staircase exactly on time, his calm expression unchanged from the moment they had signed the agreement. "Your room has been prepared in the East Wing," he said. "Mine is in the West Wing. Breakfast together when our schedules require it. Public events according to the calendar. Outside those obligations, your time is your own." Ava appreciated that he spoke with respect instead of arrogance. Yet every sentence reminded her that this marriage remained nothing more than a carefully managed arrangement. After Damien excused himself for another business meeting, Ava quietly explored her new surroundings until she reached the kitchen, where an elderly cook struggled to carry a heavy pot from the stove. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and gently helped. "Steady the weight before it slipped." The cook looked surprised. "Mrs. Castellano, someone else could have done that." Ava offered an easy smile. Sometimes the closest person should simply help. The older woman thanked her sincerely, and the conversation soon shifted from cooking to family, laughter replacing the silence that usually filled the room. Unseen by either of them, Damien paused briefly outside the kitchen while walking past. He heard the laughter, glanced inside, and noticed something unusual. The employees around Ava looked relaxed in a way he had rarely witnessed. He continued down the hallway without interrupting, but the image stayed with him long after he returned to work. Later that evening, Ava unpacked the few belongings she had brought with her. She carefully placed a framed photograph of herself and her mother beside the bed, touched the frame with quiet determination, and looked out across the snow-covered gardens glowing beneath the evening lights. She reminded herself that every difficult day inside this enormous house brought her one day closer to saving the person she loved most, never realizing that someone else inside the mansion had already begun seeing her as far more than a signature on a contract. The first week inside the Castellano estate passed with remarkable quiet, yet beneath the polished routines of the household something subtle had begun to change. Every morning Ava greeted the staff by name, remembering details about their families after hearing them only once. She thanked the housekeepers for their work, complimented the chef on every meal, and never walked past anyone without offering a genuine smile. At first, the employees responded with cautious politeness, uncertain whether her kindness was simply another performance expected from the new wife of one of the city's most powerful men. But day after day, her warmth never faded. She treated the gardener with the same respect she offered visiting executives, and she listened to the youngest kitchen assistant with the same attention she gave the estate manager. Slowly, the atmosphere inside the mansion softened. Conversations lasted a little longer. Laughter appeared, where silence had once ruled. Even the elderly butler noticed that employees no longer rushed through their duties with tense expressions. Damien observed these changes without making a single comment. During breakfast, he watched as Ava thanked the server before pouring her own coffee instead of waiting to be served. During lunch, he noticed a young maid smiling with confidence after Ava quietly praised the beautiful arrangement of fresh flowers in the dining room. These were insignificant moments by every business standard he understood, yet they remained strangely memorable. One afternoon, Ava wandered into the library searching for a novel to read and discovered several shelves filled with children's books collecting dust. When she asked the butler why they had been left untouched for so many years, he explained that one of the chauffeurs occasionally brought his 8-year-old daughter to the estate during school vacations because he could not always find childcare. The girl usually waited alone in a small sitting room until her father finished work. Without hesitation, Ava carried several books to that room, arranged them neatly on a low table beside colored pencils and blank paper she found in a nearby cabinet. then placed a small handwritten note that simply read, "Every adventure begins with opening the first page." The following afternoon, the little girl arrived with her father and discovered the reading corner waiting for her. Her eyes filled with excitement as she carefully selected her first book before thanking Ava with a hug so unexpected that both of them laughed. Standing several feet away after returning from a conference call, Damien witnessed the entire exchange without being seen. The child had visited the estate many times over the years, yet no one, including himself, had ever considered how lonely those long afternoons might have felt. That realization unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Later that evening, he entered the library intending to finish reviewing several contracts, only to notice one children's book resting slightly out of place. He picked it up absent-mindedly before returning it to the shelf, his thoughts lingering not on the story inside but on the woman who had transformed an overlooked corner into something meaningful with nothing more than attention and compassion. When he passed the sitting room once again, he heard the little girl's laughter echo softly through the hallway as Ava read aloud beside her. The sound seemed almost foreign inside walls that had long been defined by order rather than joy. Damien continued walking without interrupting them. Yet for the first time in many years, he found himself wondering whether true strength was measured not by the empire a person built, but by the quiet difference one kind heart could make in the lives of people everyone else had forgotten. By the second week, their carefully arranged marriage began demanding more than shared breakfasts and quiet conversations inside the estate. Damien's calendar filled with business dinners, charity fundraisers, and social events where the city's most influential families expected to see the newly married couple together. Every appearance required flawless coordination, every smile became part of the public image they had agreed to create, and every photograph strengthened the illusion that their marriage had been built on affection instead of necessity. Before their first formal gala, a stylist arrived at the mansion with several elegant evening gowns selected for Ava. She thanked the staff politely before choosing the simplest navy blue dress among the collection, explaining that elegance never needed to be louder than kindness. When she descended the grand staircase that evening, even the employees paused for a quiet moment. The dress reflected the warm light from the crystal chandelier, but it was her calm confidence that transformed the room. Damien looked up from adjusting his cuff links and found himself momentarily speechless. For the first time since signing the contract, he did not see the woman who had accepted a business arrangement. He saw someone whose grace could not be purchased by wealth or created by expensive clothing. During the drive to the gala, they exchanged only a few words, both reviewing the names of important guests and discussing the schedule for the evening. Their conversation remained professional, yet the silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. When the limousine stopped outside the historic ballroom, dozens of cameras flashed as reporters captured every step they took together. Damien instinctively offered his arm because appearances demanded it. Ava accepted naturally, resting her hand lightly against his sleeve without hesitation. The gesture lasted only seconds, yet Damien noticed how surprisingly comfortable it felt. Inside the ballroom, they greeted business partners, community leaders, and charitable donors with practiced composure. Ava remembered every name she was introduced to, thanked volunteers instead of focusing only on influential guests, and spent time speaking with the event staff who had worked since dawn preparing the evening. Near the back of the ballroom, an elderly couple stood quietly alone after the husband became confused by the crowded room. While others continued networking, Ava gently approached them, offering reassurance and remaining beside them until they felt comfortable enough to enjoy the event again. Damien watched the scene from across the room while pretending to continue another conversation. He had attended hundreds of galas throughout his career and had witnessed countless polished speeches about generosity, yet he realized genuine compassion often happened far away from microphones and applause. Later, while photographers requested one final portrait before the evening ended, the photographer casually asked them to stand closer together. Damien hesitated for only an instant before placing his hand lightly around Ava's back. She looked toward him with a warm smile that reached her eyes, and for a brief moment neither of them remembered the cameras surrounding them. The photograph captured something neither had intended to perform. On the drive home, snowflakes drifted quietly through the night as the city lights reflected across the windshield. Damien thanked Ava for how gracefully she had handled the evening. She smiled softly and replied that kindness was always easier than pretending to be someone else. Her words settled into the silence between them. When they returned to the estate, Damien remained standing in the grand foyer long after Ava had disappeared upstairs. He found himself replaying not the speeches, not the business conversations, and not the photographs, but the quiet moments when compassion had effortlessly outshined influence. Without realizing it, the line separating performance from reality had become just a little more difficult to see. The days following the charity gala passed with quiet consistency, yet both Ava and Damien sensed that something had begun changing beneath the carefully controlled routine of their agreement. They continued appearing together whenever business obligations required it, sharing breakfasts before busy mornings and exchanging polite conversations over dinner each evening. From the outside, they looked exactly like a successful couple adjusting to married life. Only they knew how carefully they still guarded the invisible line separating obligation from emotion. One afternoon, after returning from another public event, Ava asked the family driver to make an unexpected stop at the hospital before heading back to the estate. She carried a small paper bag filled with homemade soup the kitchen staff had prepared for her mother, along with a bundle of fresh daisies she had purchased herself from a neighborhood flower stand. Damien had planned to spend the afternoon reviewing financial reports, but a canceled meeting left him driving through the same part of the city. As his car approached the hospital entrance, he noticed Ava walking through the front doors with the familiar paper bag in one hand and flowers in the other. Curiosity quietly overcame routine. Remaining unnoticed inside the lobby, he watched as Ava greeted nurses by name, thanked the receptionist for working through another busy day, and gently embraced her mother before sitting beside her bed. There was no trace of the elegant woman who attended glamorous galas beside him. Instead, she became an ordinary daughter whose greatest happiness came from hearing her mother laugh again. After nearly an hour, Ava stepped into the hospital billing office while her mother rested. Damien remained out of sight, but close enough to hear part of the conversation. The billing coordinator informed Ava that another payment had arrived that morning, reducing the remaining balance considerably. Ava smiled with visible relief before quietly confirming that every dollar she had received from the marriage agreement should continue going directly toward treatment. When the coordinator suggested she finally buy something for herself after months of sacrifice, Ava simply shook her head. My mother spent my entire childhood making sure I always had enough. I can wait a little longer. Damien stood completely still. Until that moment, he had assumed the generous payment attached to their contract had offered Ava the comfortable life many people dreamed about. Instead, she had denied herself nearly every comfort to give someone else another chance. Returning to the estate that evening, Damien entered his study, but the financial reports waiting on his desk suddenly seemed insignificant. Numbers had always guided every decision he made, yet no calculation could explain the quiet strength of the woman now living beneath his roof. Later that night, they met for dinner as usual. Ava apologized for arriving a few minutes late because the hospital visit had taken longer than expected. Damien looked at her for a thoughtful moment before asking, "How is your mother feeling today?" The question surprised Ava because it was the first time he had asked anything personal about her life. A gentle smile crossed her face as she spoke about her mother's improving condition and the hope that had slowly returned to their family. Damien listened without interrupting, genuinely interested in every word. When dinner ended, Ava thanked him for asking before quietly wishing him a pleasant evening. As she disappeared down the hallway, Damien remained seated at the table long after the candles had burned lower. For the first time since the agreement began, he no longer saw Ava as someone who had accepted his offer for money. He saw a woman whose heart had never belonged to wealth at all, and that realization quietly changed the way he looked at everything that had happened between them. The weeks following Damien's visit to the hospital quietly reshaped the rhythm of life inside the Castellano estate. Nothing dramatic announced the change. There were no grand speeches, no emotional confessions, and no promises that crossed the boundaries of their agreement. Instead, the distance between them began disappearing through moments so ordinary that neither of them noticed how extraordinary they had become. Damien no longer scheduled every evening with endless meetings. More often than not, he returned home before sunset, discovering that dinner somehow tasted different when Ava sat across the table. Their conversations gradually moved beyond polite exchanges and business obligations. They spoke about childhood dreams they had abandoned, favorite places they hoped to visit someday, and the small moments that had quietly shaped the people they had become. Damien admitted that success had always felt easier to understand than happiness. Ava smiled gently before answering. Happiness usually arrives when people stop trying to own it. Her words remained with him long after the meal had ended. One Saturday morning, the estate hosted its annual appreciation breakfast for every employee and their families, a tradition that had become little more than a formal obligation over the years. Ava suggested moving the event from the grand ballroom into the gardens where children could play freely beneath the spring sunshine. Damien agreed without hesitation. The elegant tables were replaced with long wooden picnic tables decorated with fresh flowers gathered from the estate grounds. Laughter filled the air as children chased one another across the lawn while parents enjoyed a morning without formality. Damien walked among them without the usual distance that surrounded him, shaking hands, remembering names, and asking sincere questions about their families. Several longtime employees quietly exchanged surprised smiles. They had served the Castellano family for decades, but had never seen their employer look so genuinely at ease. Later that afternoon, Ava noticed Damien sitting alone beside the small lake at the edge of the property. She joined him without speaking, watching sunlight dance across the calm water. After several quiet minutes, Damien finally broke the silence. I used to believe that protecting myself meant keeping everyone at a distance. Ava looked toward the rippling water before replying softly. Sometimes walls keep pain outside, but they also keep love from finding the door. Damien did not answer immediately because, for the first time in years, he had no desire to argue with the truth. As evening settled over the estate, they returned inside where the old piano waited in the music room. Ava played another gentle melody while Damien listened from the doorway instead of hiding beyond it. When she finished, he quietly applauded, making her laugh with genuine surprise. "You knew I was listening before," he admitted with a small smile. "I simply did not know how to say that I liked hearing the house feel alive." Ava looked around the room, her eyes reflecting the warm light from the antique chandelier. A house only becomes a home when people are willing to fill it with pieces of themselves. Damien realized that was exactly what she had done since the day she arrived. She had never demanded change. She had simply lived with kindness until everyone around her began changing naturally. That night, after wishing each other good evening, Damien walked into his study and glanced once more at the calendar hanging beside his desk. The circled date marking the end of their 99-day agreement seemed much closer now than it had only weeks earlier. For the first time in his carefully controlled life, the future felt uncertain. Yet instead of fearing uncertainty itself, he feared only one possibility. He feared that when the final day arrived, the woman who had quietly taught him the true meaning of home would walk away believing she had fulfilled nothing more than a contract, while he would be left carrying feelings that no agreement had ever prepared him to face. The 99th day arrived far more quietly than either of them had imagined. There were no dramatic storms outside the mansion, no urgent phone calls interrupting the morning, and no unexpected events delaying what had always been promised from the very beginning. The spring sun rose gently above the gardens, illuminating the colorful tulips Ava had helped plant only weeks before. She stood beside the bedroom window holding a cup of tea, allowing herself one final moment to admire the home that had slowly become more than a temporary address. When she first crossed its threshold, every hallway had felt cold, every room had echoed with silence, and every conversation had carried the careful distance of strangers. Now the laughter of the staff drifted softly from the kitchen, fresh flowers decorated nearly every room, and warmth seemed to exist in places where only routine had once survived. Ava folded her clothes neatly into the same suitcase she had carried on her first day. She packed only what belonged to her, leaving every expensive gift exactly where she had found it. Before closing the suitcase, she carefully placed the framed photograph of her mother inside. Only yesterday the doctors had confirmed that her mother's condition continued improving beyond expectations. The treatment had given them a future she had almost stopped believing was possible, and for that she would remain grateful for the rest of her life. Downstairs, the employees gathered quietly before breakfast, each finding a private reason to thank her. The elderly gardener presented her with a small potted white rose grown from a cutting taken from the estate gardens. The young housekeeper embraced her with tears in her eyes, promising that her son still talked about the afternoons Ava had spent helping him with schoolwork. Even the reserved butler admitted that the mansion had not felt this alive in decades. Damien entered the dining room precisely on schedule, yet the familiar routine suddenly felt unbearably fragile. He watched Ava smile warmly at everyone around her, knowing each ordinary gesture might soon become only a memory. They shared breakfast with unusual calm, speaking about her mother's recovery, the beautiful spring weather, and the flowers blooming outside the windows. Neither mentioned the contract waiting upstairs inside the library, but both could feel its presence in every passing minute. After the meal, Ava asked if they could meet one last time before she left. Damien silently nodded. Inside the library, she placed her wedding ring beside the signed agreement resting on the polished wooden desk. Her voice remained steady as she thanked him for honoring every promise he had made. "You gave my mother another chance to live," she said softly. "No matter where life takes us after today, I will always remember your kindness." Damien looked at the ring resting beside the contract and realized that neither object represented the journey they had actually lived together. What remained in his heart could never be measured by signatures or legal terms. Ava gently lifted her suitcase and walked toward the grand entrance. The household staff stood waiting in quiet silence, each offering heartfelt farewells. She hugged them one by one before stepping outside into the warm spring morning. Damien remained standing inside the open doorway, watching as she slowly walked toward the waiting car. The distance between them grew with every step she took, and for the first time in his carefully controlled life, he understood what it truly meant to be powerless. Wealth could not purchase another day. Influence could not rewrite the calendar. The contract he had once believed would protect him had reached its final page, and as the car disappeared beyond the estate gates, Damien realized that losing Ava was the one outcome he had never prepared himself to survive. The heavy silence that settled over the Castellano estate after Ava's departure followed Damien into every room he entered. For years he had believed silence represented peace because it protected him from disappointment, but now it only echoed with memories he could no longer escape. The library reminded him of the afternoon she had transformed a forgotten corner into a place where a chauffeur's daughter discovered the joy of reading. The music room still carried the faint memory of gentle melodies that had awakened emotions he thought had disappeared with his childhood. Even the gardens seemed different without the woman who had patiently knelt beside young flowers, believing beauty always deserved time to grow. As evening approached, Damien wandered through the mansion, without purpose until the elderly butler quietly entered his study carrying a small, ivory envelope. "Mrs. Carter asked me to give you this only after she had left," he said respectfully before placing it on the desk and quietly leaving the room. Damien stared at the envelope for several long moments before carefully opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter filled with the same quiet grace that had defined every day Ava spent beneath his roof. She thanked him for honoring every promise in their agreement, for treating her with dignity when he could easily have treated her like a business arrangement, and for giving her mother a chance to recover. She admitted that she would always remember the mansion not because of its size or wealth, but because somewhere inside its walls she had witnessed a man slowly rediscovering the kindness he had hidden from the world for far too long. At the end of the letter, she added a single sentence that refused to leave his mind. "I hope one day you realize that your heart was never as empty as you believed." Damien folded the letter with extraordinary care and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket. Instead of returning to his unfinished work, he asked the driver to take him somewhere he had never visited before. The quiet neighborhood where Ava had grown up welcomed him with tree-lined streets, children riding bicycles beneath the warm spring sun, and neighbors greeting one another from shaded porches. It was a world built on simple routines instead of guarded walls, and somehow it felt strangely familiar after hearing Ava describe it over so many dinners. He stopped several houses away, unwilling to interrupt her life without certainty. From inside the parked car, he watched Ava helping her mother arrange flower pots along the front porch. They laughed together over something neither he nor anyone else could hear, and the sight stirred a memory of his own mother tending roses outside their family home many years earlier. For the first time, he understood why Ava's kindness had always felt so powerful. It reminded him of the love he had spent years convincing himself no longer existed. His driver quietly asked whether he wished to get out, but Damien remained still. He realized that showing up without understanding his own heart would only repeat the mistakes he had made before. Love deserved honesty, not impulse. As the sun slowly began to set, he looked once more toward the modest home before asking the driver to return to the estate. That evening, he entered the library carrying Ava's letter and opened the drawer containing the original marriage contract. He placed the folded letter directly on top of the signed document, looking at both for a long time before closing the drawer again. One represented the arrangement that had brought Ava into his life. The other reminded him that some of the most important promises could never be written into any contract. And before the night had ended, Damien quietly made one final decision. Tomorrow, he would return, not as a man offering another agreement, but as someone finally ready to speak without hiding behind one. The following morning arrived with the quiet confidence of a new beginning. Damien did not wear the tailored suit that had become part of his public identity, nor did he bring assistants, security, or carefully rehearsed words. He carried only the folded letter Ava had written and a single white rose taken from the estate garden where they had once spoken about how beautiful things needed patience to grow. During the drive, he realized that for the first time in many years, he was not traveling to negotiate a deal or protect an empire. He was simply hoping to be honest. When he reached Ava's neighborhood, he found her sitting on the front porch beside her mother, sharing coffee beneath the gentle morning sunlight. She looked up as his car stopped along the curb, surprise crossing her face before a quiet smile slowly followed. Damien walked toward the house at an unhurried pace, stopping several feet away out of respect rather than uncertainty. Ava's mother greeted him warmly before excusing herself inside, leaving the two of them alone with only the soft songs of birds and the scent of blooming flowers surrounding them. Damien held up the folded letter. "I have read this more times than I can count," he admitted. "Every time I finished, I realized something new about myself." Ava looked at him quietly, allowing the silence to invite honesty instead of filling it with nervous conversation. "When you left," Damien continued, "I thought I had lost the woman who fulfilled the contract. Then I understood something much more frightening. I had lost the person who reminded me how to become the man I wanted to be." Ava lowered her eyes for a brief moment before meeting his gaze again. "I never wanted to change you," she said softly. Damien smiled with genuine warmth. "That is exactly why you did." He reached into his jacket and carefully removed the wedding ring she had returned in the library. Resting it gently in the palm of his hand, he shook his head. This ring once represented an agreement with an ending already written. "I cannot ask you to wear it again for that reason." He slipped the ring back into his pocket before taking a slow breath. "If there is ever another ring, another promise, or another future between us, I want every word to come from choice instead of obligation." Ava felt tears gathering in her eyes, not because of grand romance, but because every sentence carried the humility she had quietly hoped he would someday discover. She stepped closer until only a small distance remained between them. "When I accepted your contract," she whispered, "I believed 99 days would save my mother's life. I never imagined those same 99 days would change mine." Damien gently reached for her hand, giving her every opportunity to step away if she wished. Instead, she closed the remaining distance herself, her fingers naturally intertwining with his. They stood together beneath the warm spring sky, no longer separated by fear, wealth, or carefully written conditions. Weeks later, the Castellano estate welcomed friends, employees, neighbors, and Ava's fully recovering mother for a simple garden celebration. There were no reporters waiting beyond the gates and no business partners expecting appearances. Children laughed among the flower beds. Music drifted from the restored piano, and the mansion that had once been defined by silence echoed with genuine happiness. Damien thanked everyone who had remained part of their journey before turning toward Ava with quiet certainty. "The contract ended exactly when it promised," he said, "but the life we chose together begins today." Ava smiled as sunlight illuminated the gardens they had helped transform together. And in that peaceful moment, Everyone present understood that the strongest promises were never the ones written on paper. They were the ones two hearts chose to keep every single day.